Welcome to Homeschool Your Way. I'm your host, Janna Cook, and Bookshark's community manager. In today's episode, I am joined by Delia Monteroso. She is the president of Chickenlandia. Now, you are probably wondering, like I was, what in the world is Chickenlandia? You are about to find out. And you're going to hear from their president. But not only is she the president of this land, she's also an author, she is a teacher, and she is all things chicken. I am so excited to bring her in and to share her expertise and for you guys to find out how chickens and homeschooling can work together. Delia, thank you so much for being here.
You are so welcome. And thank you for that introduction. That's the best one I've heard so far.
I love it. I love you're the president of your own land. And I'm the president of my own story, but it's all in my head. And yours is actually a reality. So
I think they would have voted for me. My chickens would have voted for me if they could write.
yes, you'd like to have a democracy, but it just hasn't worked out that way just yet.
Yes,
Well, for
exactly.
those who are unfamiliar with your chicken land, why don't you give a brief overview of how you created it and why you created it?
Well, I'm a backyard chicken educator, and probably my biggest platform is my YouTube channel. It's called Welcome to Chickenlandia. And then I have my website, welcometochickenlandia.com. And believe it or not, I did not lie awake at night as a child and think to myself, I want to be a backyard chicken educator when I grow up. That was not in the cards. I really thought, I'm going to be an actress. I'm going to be a talk show host. I'm going to make movies. And I actually did go to Hollywood for a period of time. I worked as a personal assistant at a few different places, and I went there because I wanted to be like the next great American filmmaker. And while I was there, I met my husband, and reality kind of set in. Maybe this isn't where we want to raise a family. So we moved from Los Angeles up to Bellingham, Washington, and that's where I live right now. And I had my first child. He was about 18 months old. And, I feel like it's really important to tell this part of the story because people don't talk about it enough, but I was suffering from a pretty intense case of postpartum depression. And I didn't know. I didn't know that that's what was happening to me. And also because of the way that I was, and I think a lot of women, especially mothers, can relate to what I'm about to say, but my family didn't know what was going on. My husband didn't really know to the extent of what was going on because I was so focused on just going, like, okay, like this is hard, but I just have to keep going, to the point to where you're literally like running yourself into the ground, but you don't really realize it. So I did know that I was struggling in some way. I really felt like I was mourning the loss of the dreams that I had when I, first went to Los Angeles, and the dreams I had as a child. And I didn't really know what to do with that because I loved my family. Obviously, I love my new baby. I love being a mom and a wife. But I really decided, you know what? I need something beyond that identity. I need something that just belongs to me, that I can do, that will kind of help me get through this period. So naturally, I thought I'm going to get some chickens. And I totally like lived in the suburbs. I grew up in the suburbs. I lived in several major cities. I just did not grow up around the growing of food. That wasn't my experience. Now of course it's in my family, and we'll get to that later. But anyway, it was like a completely new thing, and I brought these baby chicks home, and I'm telling you, it was like I was struck by lightning or some like some kind of divine intervention occurred when I was taking those baby chicks one by one out of they came in like a paper sack. I had them in a paper sack from the farm store. And I'm taking them and putting them one by one into the brooder that I had set up for them. And my heart opened and a new dream came in. And that was really the beginning of my healing. And I feel like I started to grow up. I think there was still a part of me that was kind of immature, even though I was living an adult life. I started to just kind of come into myself in that moment. And I became so passionate that my whole town basically started to know me as like the chicken lady through social media and everything. And 6 months later, the local community college was like, "Hey, can you teach a class?" And I was like, in my head, I'm like, "Okay, I've been doing this for 6 months. I did not grow up with this. Am I worthy to do this?" And I just said, "Yes, I'm going to do this." And did a whole bunch of research. At the end of that first class that I taught, a woman came up to me and she said, "I have had chickens for 30 years and I learned so much today." And that was it. It was just like, okay, this is this is the dream. And then everything kind of took shape. I had like a farm store for a little while. I had the farm store first, but that's a whole nother story. But and uh I started my YouTube channel. And then when COVID happened, the YouTube channel really took off because so many people just needed knowledge. And then, the course came first, then the book, and now here I am on the Homeschool Your Way podcast.
Here you are. I have to say, I think your story really does resonate with n- not only homeschool parents, but parents in general. I think we're not told this part of life where you think you're doing the next thing you're supposed to be doing, but we really aren't, I don't know, prepared for the reality of what we are giving up when we say yes to anything, we're giving
Yeah.
something else up. And those are good trades sometimes, and sometimes they're do-over. We got to go back and change our mind, but sometimes I feel homeschool families seek validation for their choices by pushing their children in academics or making sure that they do all the activities. And again, I think this just speaks to parents in general, but sometimes the homeschool parent feels a little bit more because it's a little more all consuming, right? Like their kids have to be smart because they chose to homeschool. And when you use the word grieving the loss of a dream, I think a lot of just adults probably aren't honest about that. That, as kids, we are pie in the sky, anything's possible. Our parents told us we could do anything in this world. And then the reality of life is that, I'm only 5'7" and I'm not going to be a basketball player for the pro women's league. But that
Well,
you
you've got a good
found
7 inches on me.
well, I mean, there's always there's always up, there's always down, right?
Yeah.
But that you were able to find something to, I don't want to say replace your dream, but in a way, it was a swap. Like it was a dream that you could have alongside the dream of having a family and doing what you want. And that passion obviously is what came through in the class that woman who has already been doing this for 30 years could learn so much. So I'm super excited to hear about what our homeschool families can learn about chickens in your book. I love this story of how it did tie in some of your family roots. So you weren't just some city folk that had an idea about chickens. You actually have like this beautiful heritage connected to chickens that you kind of tapped into.
Yeah, well, I mean, I was in the suburbs, and like I said, I grew up in the city. So I had this disconnection from my food and from my heritage. Now, I didn't know that when I started researching into chickens, I was going to learn so much about where I came from. So that was just the magic of learning about it, which is why I'm so passionate for people to learn about chickens, for people to keep chickens, because it is literally in all of our histories. Like, it's, if you go almost every single culture in the world, I mean, I can't think of, like, maybe there's some cultures somewhere that's so remote that they don't have chickens, or they don't know what chickens are. Um, but we all have that in our history in a pretty significant way. And it doesn't matter where we're from. We could be from, we could be living smack dab in the middle of the city, and we would have that. You don't have to go back that many generations to find that. And then the other thing that all of us have, that many of us have, is that severance from that. And I really feel like that is like it's like a moment of trauma that we, like collective trauma that we share. If I look into my history, I can look at, because my parents are from Guatemala. There was a war that happened there, a really awful civil war that lasted almost 40 years. My parents were forced to leave their country and to come here. And when that happened, there was a severance from nature and a severance from their culture. And of course, anyone's culture is going to be close to nature, because that's where humanity naturally exists. So when I learned about that, I felt a connection with humanity. And I'm always talking about, like, chickens are humankind's most amazing common denominator. And it's because they are. Like, if you could look, it could be chickens, it could be something else, but if you can look at something that we have in common and learn about that, you're just automatically going to be more empathetic, more compassionate against, towards your fellow human. And that's really important to me. And ultimately, like in a homeschooling situation or any kind of schooling, or even just parenting, like that is, how do you want your children to walk through the world? What do you want? What's the main thing that you want to teach them when they go out into the world? To me, it would be, love each other. So that's how deep it gets for me. I can take this chicken thing as deep as you want.
Well, I do think that our society has done itself a disservice through the compartmentalizing that we have found ourselves in this day and age. I asked my husband not that long ago, "Where does your food come from?" And he looked at me and he said, "It comes from you." I thought, "Wow, that's the very wrong answer." And from that day forward, he goes to the grocery store with me. And so we had talked before, and I would love to kind of delve into like how you see taking care of chickens for children, how that really translates into raising responsible adults.
Well, there's the whole thing where if you don't take care of the chickens, then they don't do very well. They're adorable and cute, but they're also vulnerable. Like when you first get them, you have that experience with baby chicks. It's such a wonderful experience, but there's also this feeling of vulnerability because they're so small and they need a lot of care during that time. And it's a wonderful time for you to teach your kids, hey, um, you're big and they're little, because little kids, they want to hold a baby chick and just, oh, they're like squeezing it. It's like, okay, right now we're going to learn how to gently hold this baby chick in our hand. And that's like the first lesson, one of the first lessons that you can teach them. And to be responsible, because it's a huge responsibility. You're this big human and you're holding this little baby chick. You are big and they're little. And so we have to be gentle. And then that is going to carry through the whole experience. Like, you you understand that these chickens are here, they're laying eggs. We eat the eggs. They're performing a service for us, but we're also serving them. It's an exchange. It's this really beautiful symbiotic relationship that we have that's millennia old. So, I mean, I think just everyday upkeep. And when kids are very small, you keep their chores very simple, and you make sure that they're not, because little kids put their hands in their mouths and stuff. And so you have to be mindful of that. And I don't think you should be hyper vigilant. I think, sometimes people are like, oh my gosh, all the germs, but
Well,
farm kids are like,
salmonella, right? I
yeah,
mean, that's the first thing people will say, like,
yes, yes.
I don't want
And
to spread
many other
salmonella.
things. Yeah. But like I just said, humans have been keeping chickens for thousands of years, and we've somehow survived. Um, just wash your hands. Don't be worried. Keep the coop relatively clean and wash your hands. And with little kids, they can do things like collecting eggs, filling up the food bowl, giving the chickens treats, very simple things that they can do, and then come inside and wash their hands. And then as they get older, there's other things, they can help with cleaning the coop. If there's some kind of like an egg, if you're selling eggs, they can help with that process. I mean, there's like I think of all the subjects you could teach in homeschool, and there is a way in all of them to somehow tie chickens in with it, to make it fun and to learn that way. Math, science, biology, economics, all of it. So I think it is, like any caring for any animal is going to help you to build character, and is going to give you responsibility, because it is a big responsibility, and it doesn't matter how you feel or what the weather is like outside. The chickens have to get fed. You have to let them out. You have to deal with them. So that's how I really think it can help to build some good habits and some responsibility with your kids, and with adults too. Because I still moan and groan. I had to go outside and it's snowing.
Yeah, some of us don't ever outgrow that, do we?
Yeah.
I do really enjoy that there's so many things that you can learn through having chickens. When you said the symbiotic relationship, I was like, well, that's science right there. Like
Yeah.
I'm no scientist, but man, I know that's a scientific word. And there's so many ways that we really encourage families to learn just naturally. So this is a great natural learning tool to get families not only working together, especially if they're new to homeschooling. I think, wow, I mean, granted, there's a lot on your plate to begin with, but it's something simple that even in your book, you talk about chicken math. I mean, you can start small, and it
Yes.
usually doesn't stay small, but for some people, depending on your area's laws, it has to stay small. But I think there's been such a movement to get children outside, to get families doing activities together in nature to really ground people. And I think this is such a beautiful way for families to be able to do that. Or find someone in your neighborhood or close by that has chickens and just kind of start going over there and seeing how it works before you dive in the deep end. But it is a really great way to kind of check a lot of boxes when you are raising just children in general, but then homeschooling on top of it.
Yes. And I will say, I think the number one thing that I hope homeschooling families will take from this, and I'm just going to disclose, I'm kind of a homeschool flunk. I'm a failie. I don't know how you say it, but I did homeschool my son, my oldest. Actually, it was kind of a thing where it kind of came out of some trauma. Like, he really had a serious issue with the school that he was in. And so it was this thing where we had to pull him out of school really fast. We didn't have a lot of options. And so we went right into homeschooling from that experience. So I think that's kind of a tough experience to kind of come out of. And here you're trying to do this thing. And hindsight is 2020. How I wish I would have known then what I know now, because I would have used, and I had chickens at that point. I would have used them to help to teach my son, because my son and I have a lot, we're very much alike in some ways. We're both very headstrong. And I had this feeling of just like, God, he just can't learn from me and I just can't teach him. Like I really felt like that. If I had it to do over again when we got to those moments, I would just say, let's go outside. Let's go to the chickens. It's just such a good way, even if that's the only way you use it in your curriculum, to kind of reset and take some moments outside, get some fresh air, and then come back in having just like renewed yourself a little bit. So that's one tip that I really feel like giving to people. Like if there's anything that you take away from this, that's the one thing that I'd love for you to take away, because it's not easy. Like I've been there, I've done it. I know the challenges. Um and I wish that I would have really just kind of come out. I had a very rigid way that I thought it was supposed to go, and I wish I would have thought outside of those perimeters, because if you look at it, school, just like structured schooling, is relatively new, and parents have been teaching their children since the beginning of parents and children. And so it's the most natural thing you could do, and they would just, children would learn from living life. And so if you have the things in your life that you can use to teach your children, one of those things could be chicken keeping, and it's fun too.
It's a great opportunity for families who are maybe looking for something different, something new. I have talked to several families over just the last couple months who are kind of contemplating this idea of homeschool and my gosh, what would it look like? And we are so programmed to have a picture, like, tell me what it's going to look like, tell me how it's going to be. And I'm sure you get this, with chickens too. It's like
Yeah.
kids. I can't tell you what your day is going to look like, 'cause your kids are different than my kids, and
Yeah.
your chickens are going to be different than the chickens I have, and your situation's going to be different. But just like having chickens, that anyone really can do it, and you really drive that home in your book, which I loved, that anyone, anywhere, it is almost possible for anyone to be able to do this at this point, in our country, which I think is amazing. But it's the same thing with homeschool. It's like, I don't know what it's going to look like for you, but having these other options outside of core curriculum, I think, is so important because it really does help create learning in real life. So yes, all of those things are very important and we need to teach those to our kids, but now we can apply them. And having chickens is one of, we've just talked about, like, all the great ways that you can apply the different subjects while you're doing the chickens. And so for parents who have had absolutely no exposure to chickens in any way outside of getting some eggs at the store and doing it that way, what a great way for them to take this course and have them kind of get their feet wet and go, okay, well, maybe we can do it. And then kind of knowing what is necessary and what are the bells and whistles, and don't get caught up in all of that. But here's the basics that you need, and really talking with their children and as a family coming to this decision, like, is this something that we want to incorporate into our learning? And then, all the benefits that come with it.
Yeah, I mean, I one thing that's really important to me is that I want everybody to be able to have chickens. And if you look through history, um, the poorest people in the world have always been able to have chickens. Like to this day, when you find the poorest people in the world, you will find their chickens running around with them. And so I do want to keep, that's why it's called Backyard Chickens 101, a chicken course for everyone, because I want everybody to be able to have this experience. Even if you're in the city, just if there's a will, there's a way. I want people to be able to have this experience. So I do talk about, of course, like if you want to get all the fun chicken things, like, I mean, you can spend some money on your chickens if you really want to. It's out there. You can buy it.
I think they have automatic doors now for your
Oh yeah.
chickens in the
Oh
coops.
yeah.
I mean, there's some fancy stuff out there.
There is some very fancy stuff. And it's fun. That's fun. That's fine if that's how you want to do it. But I also want to give people options. And more so, I talk about that in my book, like, okay, how can you have some options to do this even if your budget is tight? And I'm just always working on gathering information so that the chicken keeping is really for everybody. And there is even like, if you go to the course page, there's even like a payment plan. If you can't afford the full tuition from the beginning, you can pay over a 3-month period to keep it affordable, hopefully, for you. So yeah, it's
Yeah.
fun.
I mean, chickens are definitely for everyone. It is kind of funny how our society is cyclical in that the very things that kind of like, oh, as we kind of changed in our society and we cleaned ourselves up in a sense, right? The Industrial Revolution and we got away from everybody having their own gardens, their own animals, that then it was like, oh, only the poor people actually grow their own stuff. And now it's like, oh my gosh, this idea of actually only people with extra money can have a garden or have
Yeah.
chickens. And it's funny how we just keep these crazy cycles going that it really just they're all none of it is truth, but yet
No.
we just accept it like, oh, okay, yeah, that's
Yeah.
gardening's expensive, like
Um,
having chickens is outside of our reach.
Again, it's just these roadblocks that we put in front of people. And like you're describing, it's so interesting because, at one point we could look at our society and see that people would say, oh, well, if you get chickens, the property values are going to go down because only poor people have chickens. It's like this class, you could see the class divide and that kind of thought process of just like, um, chickens are dirty and people that have chickens are dirty and poor and all this. And then you kind of see things shift a little bit. And there's this idea of just like, oh, well, if you're going to have chickens, you better have a $10,000 coop. You better you better only feed them chicken feed that is very expensive, and you better not give them kitchen scraps because that's not good for them. And it's like all these things that make it exclusive, and that's very frustrating to me. I want everybody to be able to have this experience. We talked about how it's so important to have that connection with nature and what that actually means for you as a human being. You begin to look at other people differently. You begin to have more compassion, more empathy for other people. And so it is very important for people to be able to have this experience. And it's our right, to me, as human beings. Even if you're in the city, even if you're living in an apartment complex, I feel like it's time for us to find a way to make this experience available to everybody. I'm working on it.
Well, I think you're doing a great job. I also think you did a great job in your book, if, really pointing out like realistic downfalls. I mean, there's positives and negatives to everything, right? So I your passion and like your excitement is definitely tangible, but I loved in your book how you were very realistic. Like, start small. It can be this. Here's what some of the things that can happen. I mean, even the best chicken owners have chickens that, die for a number of reasons. And
Yeah.
so I liked the very realistic aspect of you're educating us in all things chicken.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want, it's never my intention to like scare people, like, oh, this is really hard. I'm always going to say, this should be the most natural thing you ever did because we have been doing this for a long time. This is in us. It's part of the human experience. But at the same time, I want to be honest about some of the issues that can happen. And so many of the issues that happen are beyond our control. Like, for instance, uh, really the main breeds that people buy, especially when they're first starting out, are these production breeds that are bred in a hatchery, and they are bred to lay a crazy amount of eggs. Like, if you go to the jungles of Asia and you go find a red jungle fowl, which is like the original chicken, um they're not going to be laying 250 eggs a year. Like that's just not, we've created these animals to produce this way, and there's an exchange for that. And unfortunately, we've exchanged their level of resilience for the amount of eggs that they can lay. And always it's how many eggs can they lay in the first year or two of life, because most chickens don't live past the second year at most, because most chickens are in a factory farm setting. So, keeping that in mind when you have chickens, if they get sick, a lot of it is reproductive issues or caused by that overactive reproductive system. And they need a very high level of nutrition in order to keep that going. So, I always tell people the quality of their life is what matters the most. You've given them this wonderful experience where they got to scratch the earth, they got to feel the air, fresh air on their skin and on their feathers, they got to see the sky, and most chickens don't get that. So to always remember that, because I do get a lot of people that are like, oh, my chicken died all of a sudden, or my chicken got sick, and what did I do wrong? And for the most part, it's nothing. You did nothing wrong. It's just that they're not bred for resilience.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, I think a lot of other societies have a better grasp on the circle of life than
Yeah.
us Americans, unfortunately. And what a beautiful opportunity to kind of bring that back for our families, for our next generation to say, you know what, like this is part of life and we don't have to be afraid of it. And it does make us sad, but there's a purpose. And so it's the circle. And now we've just closed a circle and we get to, and another one will open. And so, I think that it is another just really important lesson that I don't think was taught very well to me, especially in my years of public school. I don't know if it was the time I went to school or what, but I know that just as a society, we kind of gotten away from that. And having chickens and having animals definitely help bring that back to the surface for people because we are not eternal in our earthly vessels.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, I mean, my kids have seen that, and it is I don't blame parents for wanting to shelter your kids from that, because nobody wants to see their kid in pain. Um, but I didn't my parents, like, they didn't super shelter me from it. Like, we had cats and the cats would die, but I didn't like see death in front of me. I didn't really see that transition really until my dad passed away. And so it was shocking. And I think that it's good for children to have that exposure to the cycle of life, because it's really like it's a preparation um that they can handle. It's like at a level they can handle. Oh, the baby chick died, and it's very sad, and that's really their first understanding and of that process. And then grieving and getting over it, and then spring happens, and then baby chicks happen again. Spring is always around the corner.
Yeah,
So yeah, it's a beautiful experience that I do think is important, um for anybody, for a lot of adults. They get to be adults and they have their first chickens, and they're learning they're having some really tough experiences, but it's just, I mean, it's so gratifying. To me, it's always been worth it. And of course, the joy is more, there's more joy than sorrow
for
in, in,
sure.
in those
For
cases.
sure.
Yeah.
Well, before we go, do you have a homeschool hack or a life hack, a chicken hack that you can share with our listeners?
Hmm. Well, I think my main homeschool hack is, if you're frustrated, go deal with the chickens. Like,
I love it. I love it.
if you're cranky, go hold a baby chick. It's impossible to stay cranky if you're holding a baby chick, hopefully. um and then for chickens, gosh, you know how chickens roost, you have the roosting bars and the chickens are on the roost. If you can put like a tray underneath that, a poop tray underneath that to catch all the poop, you are going to be golden. That's like half the battle right there.
That's most of the work right there.
Yes. And then you just take that tray and put it into the compost bin.
Yeah. Well, that
Dump it
that
out
is a
in
good
there.
one for sure. So, for those of you who are interested, her book is Let's All Keep Chickens. We'll put the link in the show notes that you can find that not only on her website, but her Amazon link as well. Thank you so much for coming on today and gracing us with your knowledge of chickens and making it more accessible to those of us who have absolutely no idea what we're doing.
You are so welcome, and it was an absolute pleasure.
Thank you guys. Until next time. Bye bye.